Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. The primary race between Representative Celeste Maloy and Colby Jenkins in Utah's 2nd District narrows, but it's too close to call. We'll review all of the primary election results. Senator Mike Lee says that woke news reporting on a Utah double homicide is destructive. And a Utah man sues over Netflix the program, saying its portrayal of his troubled teen career defamed him. Joining me today are Salt Lake Tribune investigative reporter Jessica Miller. Jessica, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern is with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Appreciate it. And reporter Paighten Harkins is with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to have you with us. Note that news columnist Robert Gerke will not be able to join us this week. So let's start with you, Jessica Miller. This is kind of a piece with some reporting you have been doing on these troubled teen programs. So first, tell us about this Netflix program. I personally have missed this program, but I'm one of the few. It's been quite popular.
Yeah, you might be the only one, it seems like. There was a 3-part series that came out, I think, in March called The Program. It centered on a woman's story. She was a resident at a facility, one of these programs in New York, and she's also a filmmaker. And so it kind of tells her story of her experience going to this school, the abuse she says happens there. She talks to other people who were at this school. It's called the Academy at Ivy Ridge. But where kind of Utah brings in or comes into this is the school was part of this umbrella company called the Worldwide Association of Programs and Schools. And that was started in Utah by this Robert Litchfield person. And so her documentary also kind of focuses on the programs. They've shortened it to WASP is kind of how people talk about it. And so it goes into kind of the Litchfield family and the WASP programs and kind of this network of these troubled teen programs that just sprawled all across the world, really, in the 90s and the early 2000s.
No, what is this is Catherine Kubler, right? What does she say happened to her and others at these places?
She details a lot. I mean, similar to many of the people who go to these type of programs, just talk about, the level of control that they had over them, that they were abusive, that they held on people in restraints, a lot of emotional abuse, some physical abuse. And, depending on each person, the experiences kind of differed, but kind of the similar themes that we see from a lot of these former residents who have gone through these programs.
So Narvin Litchfield was featured in the program. I guess you might say as a villain, right? So he's suing Netflix. What is he for defamation? What does he say that they said about him that's not true?
Yeah, so Narvin is the brother of kind of the guy who founded this, and he had 2 of his own programs and may or may not have had some connections with the Academy at Ivy Ridge. And so he kind of becomes a character in this Netflix series, and they kind of literally compare him to, or they say like Narvin is a great name for a villain or something like that. They kind of cast him in this villainous light, and he says that they defamed him by insinuating that his programs were abusive or that he had been abusive. He was actually arrested in 2003, I think, in Costa Rica for a program that he ran where abuse allegations had been made. And they included that headline in the Netflix show, but then didn't include the follow-up, which was he was found innocent of those charges. And so it's things like that where he was saying, you took the worst things and cast this in this light that I'm this abusive villain. And I've been found innocent of this. None of my programs have ever, been found guilty of these child abuse accusations that they say that happened in these facilities.
One, I think part of the complaint is, and you have this photo here in the story, there's a photo of him, Narvin Litchfield, juxtaposed with a clipping from the Tribune about teens dying in these outdoor programs.
Yeah, and that's one example where he points to where he's saying, like, you took a picture of me, you put a headline about a death in a wilderness program. He doesn't run a wilderness program, so obviously that's not about him, and put them side by side. And so the insinuation that, the average reader might, or average watcher, sorry, might conclude is, I ran this program where this child died, I'm a murderer. And so he's saying that it's instances like that where they've crossed the line into defamation.
So Narvin Litchfield says that the result in his life has been negative. What does he say has been happening?
Yeah, he says since this show came out, he's been the target of online harassment, group campaigns kind of targeting him. He's gotten death threats to various degrees of seriousness. So for him, this has really had a negative impact in his life, he says. And I mean, this was a very, very popular show. It was, I think, the most watched show on Netflix for a couple of weeks. I think in the first couple of days, 5 days, it had like 22 million hours of viewing. So a lot of people were watching this program.
You report his estranged adult son was featured in the documentary. What does he say about that?
Yeah, his son was in the documentary also, and kind of talked about, I believe, he lived at one of these programs with his dad. I watched the show back in March, so I'm a little fuzzy on the exact details. And so he kind of talked about, the abusive behavior that he saw, or he says he saw happen. And Narvin, in his lawsuit, says that his son was manipulated into being part of this program. I did see on Facebook, his son did do a post after this lawsuit was filed and said, I wasn't manipulated. I felt very empowered through this process, and I'm really glad that this documentary came out. So his son's pushing back a little bit on the allegation that he was manipulated into being part of the Netflix show.
Now, apparently, the Dundee Ranch in Costa Rica, the 3-judge panel did find that there were children who were abused, but what they said was there's no evidence that Narvin Litchfield ordered that abuse.
Exactly. Yeah. The Costa Rican officials at that time raided the school because there was allegations of some civil rights violations. And so there definitely was some issues in that facility, and it closed down shortly afterwards. But as you said, this 3-judge panel decided that while, yes, there was evidence of abuse, there was no evidence that said, Narvin was the mastermind who directed all of this or who ordered this abuse to happen.
Mr. Litchfield was also tied to Carolina Springs Academy in South Carolina. What does he say about that?
I don't know as much about his time in South Carolina. I think that program was also shut down. A lot of these WASP programs were shut down because of abuse allegations or torture allegations. So the company kind of dissolved in like 2010, I think. And in the lawsuit, he does try to distance himself from the WASP name or the WASP brand, saying, it basically was like a franchisee. I just paid dues to use like that name. I didn't get any of the profits from the WASP umbrella itself. So he's definitely trying to like distance himself from this network of programs that has had a lot of abuse and torture allegations against it over the years.
Finally, what is Mr. Litchfield seeking in this lawsuit?
He's seeking monetary damages, punitive damages, but also he's asking a judge to order Netflix and the director to basically take down any type of defamatory materials. So I guess that would mean changing the Netflix show. Also, not any social media posts, any type of media. That way he wants it to all of the information about him, everything that he believes is defamatory, taken out of the media.
Oh, well, thanks for telling us about this. I want to move to another couple of stories. We have a little bit of time here. Somewhat related, there's a congressional investigation into youth treatment centers in Utah and across the country. How do these differ from these teen therapy programs that we were just talking about?
They're the same.
Oh, the same thing. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. These congregate care residential treatment center, it's kind of their terms used interchangeably. So when we talk about the congressional hearing and kind of their findings about abuse and mistreatment in these programs. It's the same thing, these troubled teen programs. That hearing centered on kind of like a couple of the larger, universal health services, like these big medical conglomerates that own a lot of facilities throughout the country. And they focused those findings on allegations of abuse and mistreatment and neglect at kind of the big owners of a lot of these facilities.
So this is a Senate committee. Oregon Senator Ron Wyden said abuse and neglect is the norm of these places. Pretty serious allegations.
Yes, and he also, talked about, because obviously these are all private facilities, but a lot of government money goes to pay for these programs. Kids are going through with Medicaid, their kids in the foster care system, kids' school districts can sometimes pay for it. And so he essentially said that this is taxpayer funded child abuse that's happening. And he believes that more regulation is needed. Right now, there's no federal regulation. So it's just kind of a patchwork system of state by state of how these are regulated.
What do these companies say? These are big medical companies who tout these services. What do they say?
I spoke with the Universal Health Services because they were the ones that had programs in Utah, and they pushed back on this allegation or this conclusion that their programs were abusive. They said, that there are a lot of people that are helped with these programs, and that things do happen, but they're trying to make things better, and Congress is just choosing to focus on the worst things, and that is just like the minority when most people are getting help. That's what they say, at least.
So what does Congress want to have happen? I guess the federal government doesn't regulate these centers, do they? That's the state. So what can the feds do?
They could enact federal regulations if they wanted to. I'm not sure if that would happen. I know that the congressional leader from Oregon wants to enact something like that, but the wheels of the federal government move very slow. I think they started this study like 2 years ago, and we're just at this point where we have findings. So I think it's going to be a long time before we see any kind of significant regulation or oversight. They did request that the companies like Medicaid and child welfare services kind of look at where their money's going and see if, instead of sending kids out of state to these type of programs, are there community-based programs that keep them in their home, if that money could be spent, kind of in home-based care rather than sending a kid across the country to a program that they don't really know what's happening.
Well, thanks for telling us about this one as well. Try to fit at least one more in. This is your latest story. You've been covering this OBGYN David Broadbent. He's been accused by more than 100 women of touching them inappropriately. Now, I guess the latest news is criminal charges filed against him.
Yes, yeah. Prosecutors in Utah County yesterday charged him with forcible sexual abuse. That's a second-degree felony, which can carry up to 15 years in prison. So it's just the one charge right now, but the prosecutors say that they're still screening a lot of the cases. They had hired an expert, I think just earlier this month. They're going through all these cases. And so there could be more charges coming, but they did file one yesterday.
So remind us, the courts ruled that these women, you can say it better than I do, had missed their chance filing under a certain part of the law versus another. I'm saying it very badly. You know what I'm trying to get to. You can say it better.
Right, yeah. And you're talking about the civil lawsuit, right? And so that's still being tied up with the Utah Supreme Court. And so what happened yesterday was more on like the criminal side. And there's still a lot of issues with, statute of limitations there. But for the one charge that was filed, it was a woman who went to him in 2020, who, went for one type of exam that normally would not involve like touching your chest or anything like that. And that's what she said happened, that he lifted up her shirt and her bra and touched her breast, and then, kind of grabbed her in a way that she interpreted to be sexual. And so when it comes to the criminal side, like I said, there are some some issues with statute of limitations with some of the women who had experiences, in the 2000s, but the prosecutors are reviewing cases now that are within statute of limitations that they could file on if they think that a crime had been committed.
We have just a couple more minutes. Give us your 2-minute version of this headline. When Utah therapists lose their licenses, some turn to life coaching instead. I guess some government officials are thinking maybe we ought to regulate life coaching.
Yes, I'm sure many people are familiar with the criminal case of Jodi Hildebrandt. She was a therapist turned life coach who was convicted and is now in prison for abusing two of her business partner's children. And so that case has, gotten on legislators' radar, and they are considering whether to regulate life coaching. And so for this story, I kind of looked at, the therapists who either willingly left their credentials and became a life coach like Jodi Hildebrandt did. And then we found quite a few who lost their license as therapists for misconduct and then just became life coaches, which is totally unregulated. The government has no oversight in that. And so there are people that are really concerned, therapist organizations especially, that maybe we do need oversight of this life coaching business or life coaching industry because there is such potential for harm. And oftentimes the work that they're doing really gets close to someone's mental health. And so that's kind of the job of a therapist who's trained and, kind of understands how the brain works and how to do therapy. And with life coaching, you don't really have to have any training at all. Anyone can call themselves a life coach. There's no education or training required.
So no regulation at all right now.
No, not in Utah, or really not across the country. If Utah does decide to regulate this or require registration, they would be the first in the country to do it.
Ah, right. Oh, all over the nation, no regulation. All right, very good. Well, investigative reporter Jessica Miller, thank you so much for telling us about these stories. I know we have to let you go. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to review election results. At least one race too close to call. We'll be talking with State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. More following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Salt Lake Tribune State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
You've been covering these elections. I know Paighten has as well. So Emily, let's start with the 2nd District. Representative Celeste Maloy has been in for 6 months, replacing Chris Stewart, who retired from Congress. Challenger Colby Jenkins, a reading headline here from this morning, her lead is now down to 991 votes.
Right. That lead has continued to shrink as the state has processed more ballots, or as counties have processed more ballots and turned those returns into the state. It's below 1,000 votes. We'll see later this afternoon what that difference looks like as the state continues to go through more ballots. This race has been pretty interesting because the two candidates have gotten two of the biggest names and endorsements in the state, right? Senator Mike Lee, who's the senior member of Utah's federal delegation, is someone who a lot of candidates, Republican candidates, compete for his endorsement and seek it out. And he surprised a lot of people by not backing incumbent Celeste Maloy and instead backing Colby Jenkins. He's been upset with some of Celeste Maloy's votes, including around federal budgets, in which she voted on a budget bill in which Republicans came to the table with Democrats and negotiated on that. He also was upset about her vote to continue FISA. And so, he ended up backing Colby Jenkins. But Celeste Maloy, she had even from the special election last year in which she ran, she'd had some support of some former Trump administration officials. And she actually ended up securing former President Donald Trump's endorsement in this race. So, you see these two big endorsements up against each other, and now we're seeing how that's turning out.
Do we know? Do we know where we are in percentage of votes now counted? How many more left?
So it depends on, which county you're looking at. It's hard to say. As you're looking at counties, there's a number that still have to, a lot of them have to count both in-person ballots, mail ballots, and provisional ballots. So we really don't have an idea as to how many more ballots there are to count.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. I'm sure you'll be reporting on that. Let's turn to the governor's race. Governor Cox is projected to win over his challenger, Phil Lyman. Where's that race stand? Governor Cox still holding a fairly healthy lead?
Yeah, the lead is still pretty sizable between Governor Cox and State Representative Phil Lyman, who's challenged him in the race. It's just over 10%, 10 percentage points between the two. And it's been in the days since we started seeing results, it's been quite interesting to see how Governor Cox's challengers responded.
So Representative Lyman, on the night of, he said he wasn't going to concede. He previously had said he was going to want to make sure that I don't know, there was an audit of the election, or to make sure he was secure in the results. Has he said anything past the election night?
Yeah, and on election night, he was talking about how he would not be conceding that night, and he won't be conceding until, he feels that his campaign has sufficiently reviewed the results. He's an accountant by profession, and he says that because of that, he wants his campaign to look through the results themselves, audit those. And I will note that by law, the legislature's auditor's office, they audit every election and present that to the legislature. And so, Representative Lyman has seen these audits, but he said he would rather it be done by an accountant, an independent accounting firm like his own. And he continues to raise doubts about the election results. A lot of his fixation in recent days, just he started talking about it just in the couple of weeks leading up to the primary election, was the signatures that Governor Cox gathered to get on the ballot. If you remember back when there was the Republican state nominating convention, Phil Lyman beat Spencer Cox. But Spencer Cox at that point had already qualified for the ballot by gathering Utahns' registered Republican voters' signatures. But Phil Lyman is his running mate, Natalie Clausen. She's tried to get some of those signatures. Signatures under state records laws are protected records, and so they haven't been able to get those. And so because of that, they're saying that that's one of the ways in which they've raised doubts about this election. And that's not the only way. Even going back to the convention, Phil Lyman previously had a different running mate, or had chosen a different running mate, and he wasn't allowed on the ballot because he didn't meet the constitutional requirement that he live in the state for 5 years before running for lieutenant governor. And Phil Lyman called that election interference.
I should note that I think it was Davis County Clerk was overseeing signature gathering, and he came out with a strong statement affirming that the governor had the signatures he needed.
Right. Yeah. This because the lieutenant governor in the state oversees the elections process, and because, of course, Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson is running with Governor Spencer Cox for re-election, they've taken some steps to make sure that that election oversight is independent. So, I was referencing earlier when Phil Lyman's previous running mate wasn't allowed on the ballot. The final decision on that was made by a former lieutenant governor, Greg Bell, who's been an independent advisor in the race. When it came to the signature gathering process, it was the Davis County Clerk's Office that was checking all the signatures, and the Davis County Clerk's Office was also, verifying signatures for other statewide races. And the Davis County Clerk, Brian McKenzie, said, "We verified these signatures. There weren't any issues with the signatures. Governor Cox met the signature gathering requirement." But, as Phil Lyman's campaign talks about these issues, they still place blame with the lieutenant governor's office, even though a lot of these responsibilities or the issues that they're raising are not responsibilities or not tasks that the lieutenant governor's office has taken on this election.
Let's move to the Senate race. Representative John Curtis appears to have won that fairly handily over three other candidates. I guess notably, Mayor Trent Staggs received President Trump's endorsement, and I think he won at convention, right? But Representative Curtis appears to have won that race pretty handily.
Right. This is another example of, candidates who won at convention who there was a different result in the primary election. I think we saw a number of examples this primary election in which the average Republican voters' viewpoints or attitudes around politics diverge with Republican delegates in the state. John Curtis beat Trent Staggs pretty handily. He had over 50% of the votes so far. And, as he was facing multiple other candidates in that primary, that's pretty significant. I think just checking back at the election numbers, he's actually right now at just over 49%, and the closest is Trent Staggs at just over 32%.
Mm-hmm. There was some grousing about outside money coming in. A lot of money came in for Representative Curtis.
Right. A lot of candidates brought up took issue with that. I think what Curtis's campaign would say about that is that Representative Curtis has already has roots in Washington and has worked with a lot of different groups outside of the state, and so I think his campaign would probably point to that. But that was something that other candidates brought up in the race.
Mm-hmm. I believe, is it the 3rd district, Mike Kennedy, was he the only one that won at convention that also won in the primary? There might have been one or two others, but I believe he won at convention and won the primary.
As far as, some of the major races, he was one of the only ones. There were some other statewide races that where convention candidates did decently well, but yeah, he was one of the few, and of course we'll see what happens in the 2nd congressional district race.
That's right. Yeah, that's still too close to call. And the 1st district, Blake Moore, I think, won pretty handily.
Yeah, he did, which wasn't too big of a surprise. I mean, Blake Moore really has one of Utah's highest leadership positions in Congress as a Republican. And so, and he's pretty well established. His opponent, Paul Miller, hasn't really, had a political career in the past. And so, even though Paul Miller beat him 55% to 45% at the convention, Blake Moore won pretty handily in that race. He's currently at just over 71%, where his opponent, Paul Miller's, at nearly 29%.
And just a reminder for people, 4th District, Burgess Owens, Representative Owens, I think was unopposed.
Right. Yep. So we already knew the outcome of that primary.
Yeah. So the Attorney General's race, tell us a bit about that one.
That's one that, primarily my colleague Robert Gerke has covered pretty closely, but it ended up being Derek Brown who came out on top. He had received a lot of support from state officials. He previously worked with Mike Lee, and so you saw videos on social media of Mike Lee out canvassing with Derek Brown out campaigning and knocking on doors with him. So, as far as Rachel Terry, she works in state government, oversees risk management for the state. But when you looked at support from state officials, if that's, something that is a predictor of race outcomes, Derek Brown did have a lot of that.
Tell me a little bit about the attitude. I think you did a story a while back here. I think it was you. Maybe it wasn't. Anyway, about the caucus convention system, talking to several Republican officials, there's some mixed feelings, I think. Do we keep it? Do we not? Some people just love it to death, and think it only should be caucus convention. Others are saying it's obviously not representative of where the mainstream of the party is.
Right, and Robert Gerke had a great story on this yesterday.
Okay, maybe that was the one I was reading. Yeah.
Well, and I think this has been a big discussion since we had the state nominating convention in April. There were a lot of Republican officials who were quite popular in the state who were not received well at convention, including, as we were talking about earlier, Blake Moore, who has a leadership position with the Republican caucus in Congress. And, you see the state's governor, who right now has like a 10% lead in the primary, getting booed. And so I think, well, then you see in the state legislature a lot of their challengers to current state lawmakers winning in convention, and then the parties giving money to challengers to beat incumbents. And so I think that's left a sour taste in the mouths of some of the state's Republican elected officials. And so there are a lot of questions about, what the future of the convention might look like. You see a lot of Republican Party leaders themselves wanting to get rid of, say, the signature gathering process, which is how candidates like Spencer Cox, Blake Moore, et cetera, got on the ballot. And then you see that the Republican Party wants to get rid of the signature gathering process. And so I think there's a bit of a division within the Utah Republican Party right now as to what direction it should go in picking its candidates.
I'd like to fit in one more story here, just your 2-minute version on this one. Published today. Utahns can't vote to limit congressional candidates' age. That's the ruling from the state Supreme Court. Apparently, some Utahns wanted to put this question on initiative, cap the age at 81. I guess I don't know if that was coincidental to our current president's current age. Anyway, why did the Utah Supreme Court say you can't get that on the ballot?
Right. And I think it was coincidental, at least in part, because the ballot initiative would have focused on congressional candidates here in the state. But there is a Supreme Court precedent from 1995 when, Arkansas tried to amend its constitution to limit the state's federal elected officials to 3 terms. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, like, hey, nice try, but only Congress can make rules uh, about what the qualifications for running for Congress. And states can't make rules that are stricter than what's in the US Constitution. So, under that, the Utah Supreme Court said, hey, like, we really can't consider this question because the US Supreme Court has ruled on it. But you see a similar measure being, voters, like just a couple of weeks ago in North Dakota, voters approved a similar measure. And so that measure itself could set up a case for the Supreme Court to reevaluate whether states can make rules around their congressional candidates.
All right, very interesting. You can check out all these stories at sltrib.com. State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
We're going to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about an important homicide case and debate over how the media is covering that. The story we talk about, Paighten Harkins' story, Senator Mike Lee says that woke news reporting on a Utah double homicide is destructive. We'll have more on Behind the Headlines following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Return next to reporter Paighten Harkins. Paighten, thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
The headline here, Senator Mike Lee says that woke news reporting on Utah double homicide is destructive. Tell us first about this double homicide. This is in the St. George area?
Yeah, it happened, I guess, a little bit northeast of St. George in Washington City. But the shootings actually happened on June 18th, which was last Tuesday, I believe. And it was, according to police documents, the suspect in this case, Mia Bailey, went to her parents' house with the intent to kill them that day. She came with a gun and fired at her mom and then her dad. I'm not sure if it was in that order, but fired at them both. Shot them twice, actually, just to make sure they were dead. And then she, left the house. Oh, she also, I guess, apparently tried to shoot her brother as well through he had heard the commotion going on upstairs, went downstairs to hide from her, and she fired allegedly through a door that he was behind. I mean, just sort of as far as homicides go, obviously this was horrible and terrible that this happened, but it's not unlike, homicides that unfortunately happen, but this case, it seemed like sort of took off in the local media and in the national media. It seems like just because of the suspect's gender, she was transgender. And so when police, put out the be on the lookout for this person alert, they mentioned that she was transgender and, might be wearing wigs. So she may have shorter hair, she may have longer hair, and stuff like that. And it just seems like from there, the story just kind of, took on a whole, a life of its own, I guess you could say.
So this is how she was reported as a woman, right? Describes a woman in a lot of media outlets, including KSL, and I guess Senator Lee took a specific objection to the way KSL was covering this.
Yeah, the point he was, I guess, trying to make was that, in a public safety situation, when there is somebody on the loose who is, considered dangerous, has just allegedly killed two people, you need to be sort of, be sure what you're on the lookout for, who you're on the lookout for. And so Senator Mike Lee was trying to say that, this transgender woman should have been identified as a man. The public should have been told to be on the lookout for a man, which, doesn't super makes sense because this person, again, is, female presenting. She is a woman. It's like it doesn't really make sense to look out for a man. But that was the thing that he took issue with.
And news outlets, I think, are going on legal, right? I guess this woman had her gender expressed legally on legal documents.
Yeah, she had, gone through the court process of, changing her name legally, getting her gender marker changed legally. And so, yeah, it's like when a lot of times when police are sort of putting out this public safety information, I mean, they're kind of going off what public documents exist or what witnesses want to tell them. And so police were just sort of covering their bases, giving the public, the information they thought that the public needed in order to sort of help find this person. And I mean, the shooting happened at about 7 p.m. on June 18th, and she was found the next day around 8 a.m. or something like that. So, I mean, there was a significant amount of time that she was, on the loose, and the public, should have been on alert for her. I think even, the neighborhood where the shooting happened and sort of the surrounding area, I think they were on like not like a lockdown, but something similar, just kind of stay in your houses, don't go outside. And so, yeah, so police were kind of looking at that information, and then they gave the media that information, and the media reported it. And it's, best practices. A lot of LGBTQ advocacy organizations say it's like, it's not really relevant most often to bring up somebody's gender like this, to say that they're transgender. But in this case, it was, it was relevant because of, the fact that her appearance could have been in flux, or something like that. So anyway, the media were just kind of trying to disseminate the information, but, the headlines and, bodies of the story would say stuff like, the woman is on the loose, or she is on the loose, or be on the lookout for her, like the daughter shot the parents, or something like that. I mean, they were just using the pronouns and stuff that were applicable, and Mike Lee took issue with that.
You point out that Senator Lee had a couple of inaccuracies in his post as well.
Yeah, no, I thought that was interesting. He was going on about the importance of, accurate information in a public safety situation, when he himself, had a few facts wrong in his own retelling of the story. He described Mia Bailey as 6'1" and as a man, and said that the homicides took place in St. George, when, police said that she's 5'10", she's a woman, and that she, that the homicides took place in Washington City. So it's like, it seemed to sort of undermine his argument a little bit. If the argument was that, facts matter in situations like this, he erred himself.
You talked to a University of Utah professor. What did he say?
Yeah, no, I wanted to. Well, honestly, when I set out to write this story, I had hoped to talk to sort of law enforcement sources about, sort of best practices for putting out information for a be on the lookout alert. How do they decide what information is relevant and what to include and all that stuff. But nobody got back with me. And so I ended up reaching out to a political science professor at the University of Utah, who, sort of closely follows the media and the interactions with politics and politicians and stuff like that. And, he was telling me that, well, he was telling me that, the idea of politicians attacking the media, I mean, that's not new. They, on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans have, done it for years to try to, appeal to their base and, garner donations and all that stuff. It's familiar for, Democrats to, what am I trying to say? It's familiar for Democrats to speak out against Fox News, for instance, or conservatives to speak out against MSNBC or something. That's normal. But he was telling me that sort of in the more modern era after and during the Trump presidency, that it seems like the attacks against the media from Republicans have gotten to be sort of more pointed against the media. It's not just that they're covering something inaccurately, but they are the enemy of the people, and that's like a fundamentally different sort of stance to come by. And so he was saying that what Mike Lee was doing was an example of the second type of attack on the media, and he said that it's dangerous, to a functioning democracy, because I mean, the media is integral to that. We're the fourth estate for a reason. We exist to give people the information to be free and self-governing, and if
somebody sowing doubt, and not just sowing doubt, but saying that, the media explicitly cannot be trusted and that we're the enemy. I mean, that's a problem. And he was saying that's what Mike Lee was doing with this criticism, and also, criticism that he'd levied against KSL prior to this, which I don't know if we'll get into that, but I mean, him attacking KSL is kind of a pattern that has been going on since like June 13th.
Yeah, that's I noted, made special note of it's a little informal poll. His office says it was a joke on X. Would you rather listen to NPR for a day, KSL for a day, or be waterboarded? Pay attention to that, because we're an NPR affiliate here at UPR.
Sure.
Most of the voters, of course, these would be followers of Mike Lee, chose torture.
Yeah, and this poll comes after KSL News Radio, I think it was on Facebook, posted something along the lines of, the Republican Party is troubled. Are you tired of the party's antics? And, a lot of conservatives were apparently pretty offended by this and have been speaking out against it. And so this poll, was sort of born out of that, I guess born from that post that KSL made. But yeah, the beef, I guess, with KSL has been sort of, I don't want to say confounding, but it's been sort of puzzling to me. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. I'll just make reference to this. You have a link in your story to this. Another story in the Tribune about State Representative Kira Birkeland, who is insinuating that gender-affirming hormonal therapy might be a cause as why Mia Bailey did these murders. Anyway, Paighten Harkins, thank you so much for telling us about this.
Yeah, of course.
Well, it's time for our underplayed stories of the week. We'll start with Emily Anderson-Stern. What's your underplayed story of the week?
Mine is one from Anastasia Huffam on a Utah lawmaker talking about Colorado wolves who, might wander into Utah, and asking if we can return them to Colorado, quote, in the form of a rug.
Yeah, that was quite the story. sltrib.com for that one. Paighten Harkins, what's your underplayed story of the week?
So my underplayed story of the week is from Colby Peterson. She's one of our food reporters, or I guess our food reporter, and she's been doing this series where she's finding new and interesting restaurants that she's not been to on Redwood Road. And so she found this horror-themed burger place called Burgertory, and I just thought the way she told the story is pretty delightful. Lots of sort of spooky food-based puns in there. So check that out.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. sltrib.com. I'll choose one of Corton Tanner's. Headline is Utah officials were not racist when they stopped Ute tribe from buying Tabby Mountain. That's according to a judge's ruling. Check that out, and all the other coverage at sltrib.com. You've been listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. We've had with us State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Emily, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. And reporter Paighten Harkins, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Investigative reporter Jessica Miller was with us. She had to leave. Thanks so much to her. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Behind the Headlines. Hope you join us next time.